And I think I'm actually going to start, not in the order I anticipated. I'm going to start with a little bit of a confession. And that is that I am not a marketing guy. I'm sure a bunch of you people in the audience are marketing specialists, which is awesome. Marketing specialists, we got a bunch of them? Yes, a whole bunch of them. All right. So what I'm going to say is a layperson's opinion. But it seems to me that success in marketing is largely dependent on the ability to have your message outcompete the other messages that are out there. Amongst the myriad of different messages you're going to hear out there in the world, having yours stand out because it's something that others aren't willing to say or something others aren't capable of saying about their own product or about their own services. And you know, I saw an awesome example of this today when I was getting ready to come up here and speak. And that is, look, where's my buddy Lawrence? Lawrence, right here. Lawrence has the coolest shoes I've ever seen. Lawrence, can you hold up one of these guys? Check these guys out. These are amazing. I don't know where the heck Lawrence got these shoes, but they're incredible. And I looked at the sea of people waiting to come in, and I immediately spotted this guy and had to go over and talk to him. I had no idea what he did, no idea what his name was, but the shoes brought me in. They like a tractor beam, they drew me in. And so, given that marketing is largely about standing out amongst all the other noise, maybe it isn't as much as a surprise to you guys who are familiar with marketing as it was to me to learn that the most powerful, the most sophisticated sales engagement platform on the market today didn't start as a sales engagement platform. It actually started as a marketing CRM. And judging by the color code orange you see around, you probably guess what CRM I'm talking about, right? My name is David Gable. I am the head of sales for a company called Kixie. We are a sales engagement platform specializing in call and text automation. With me today is Aldo Barbagiovanni. He is the head of solutions engineering at Kixie as well. And today we're going to talk to you about how HubSpot, the once marketing CRM, came to become and is capable of being the most powerful sales engagement platform on the market today. And when I talk about sales engagement platforms, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about a segment that was carved out by some of the originals, Outreach, SalesLoft, who's actually here today. And they carved that segment out to such a degree that now it's like a Gartner quadrant, right? Everyone recognizes this. It was like 10 years behind MarTech, right? Sales tech kind of is coming into fruition. And most of them, for those of you who haven't been privy to using them, they look something like this. They're like a mini CRM that kind of bolts onto a major CRM, where all the sales contacts are housed and stored, and you can engage in what I like to call prescriptive sequences out of them. And what is a prescriptive sequence? Well, you'll recognize it when I describe it. A prescriptive sequence for a sales rep goes something like this. New lead comes in. Day 1, call lead. Day 2, send a text message. Day 4, call lead, send an email. Day 8, call lead, that kind of thing. But when you think about it, there's no particular reason that you are calling that lead at 2 p.m. on a Thursday on day 10, other than the fact that it came up in your sequence. Thursday, 2 p.m., day 10, call the lead. But if you're on HubSpot, and I hope you are, if you take away nothing from this presentation, it should be that HubSpot is an amazing platform to adopt. If you're on HubSpot, you have all this data coming into the CRM. You know if they've opened emails you've sent them. You know if they've visited your website. You know if they've engaged with your chatbot. You know if they've watched an embedded video in one of your emails. You have all this data coming in. And what does the typical sales engagement platform do with that data? You call the lead on Thursday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon on day 10, because that's what's in your sequence, right? That's what you're doing with that data. Maybe, at most, you get a task that pops up. So-and-so read your email, you should call them, right? That's the most that happens. But there's a better way to do this, right? Because what you're essentially doing is you're asking somebody to acquiesce to a conversation that is an unspecified amount of time, right? You're calling them on day 10, Thursday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, saying, hey, I want you to accept this phone call, knowing nothing about the content, knowing nothing about how long the phone call is going to be, and it's almost guaranteed to not be in sync with your own calendar. It's only in sync with my calendar, the sales rep who's making the call. So instead, we should automate a call the second that they open that marketing email, the second that they visit your web page or engage with your chatbot. And guess what? If they don't answer the phone, we can drop an automatic voicemail, send an automatic text, and when they reply to that text, now you know they're at their phone. Let's go ahead and give them a call right then and there. So what I'm gonna do right now, I'm actually gonna turn it over to Aldo to talk about how you accomplish that. Because unlike some presentations that are super helpful but are more general and kind of broad, I wanna get in the weeds. Because I know for me, sometimes I go to a presentation, I'm like, these are really cool, broad strokes, guidelines for how to accomplish something, but like, what do I actually do? Like, I wanna build a workflow. I wanna actually engage in the material that I've been presented with, and I wanna make sure we deliver that to you in the next 35 minutes, something like that. Aldo?
Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. I'm Aldo, Head of Solutions Engineering at Kixie. And, we're all familiar with inbound and outbound leads. But I find that when you're designing a sales outreach process, it's far more helpful to think of them in terms of warm and cold. It's less nuanced, more actionable, and more relevant to what you're actually trying to accomplish. It actually reminds me of when we were spearheading our BDR program about 1 to 2 years ago. And the first campaign they were going on was actually recovering lost deals that were about a year old. Now, a lot of these lost deals were actually inbound leads. And there was this whole conversation. It was almost like a philosophical question about are these still inbound leads or are they now outbound? I had this sort of revelation that it doesn't really matter where they were at this point. We are now going to have to build a cold outreach process because they're cold. And what I want to call out today is that oftentimes your leads are fluctuating between these two states, warm and cold. Inbound leads generally do enter as warm, however, they can become cold, and you can make a cold lead warm through engagement. So that's what we're going to cover today, recognizing how these shifts occur and building a strategy inside of HubSpot to handle both situations. So I'm gonna tell you some stuff you already know. Warm leads and cold leads. Let's just do a quick breakdown of what they look like. Warm leads are generally inbound, but not always. They're engaged, and they're actively searching for a solution. Meanwhile, our cold leads oftentimes are outbound, but not exclusively. They're disengaged, and they're probably not even aware that they have a problem. At best, they might realize they have a problem, but they're not really prioritizing finding a solution. So let's go ahead and move on. And I just want to call out that the most important thing you can do with your warm leads is make sure that you remove all friction from the process. Warm leads become cold over time. The longer that we go between a conversation and when they first engage with your material, the more cold they become. I call these engagements heating events, like David was calling out earlier. Email gets opened, they submit a form online, they attend your webinar.
And that makes sense, right? Because what was once an inbound warm lead when they first filled out that gated content or engaged with your email campaign or visited your website, that lead, the ability to contact and get a hold of them on whatever medium it is, text, email, phone call, that declines drastically over time. Initially, it's great. They're hyped. They're excited about your product or service. They want to learn more about it. Amazing. 2 weeks later, man, time moves quick. I mean, for me, if a website takes 20 seconds to load, I'm furious, right? So the idea of 2 weeks between actually getting in contact with someone who understands their process, wants to really run discovery with them, talk about the product or service, that's crazy. We need to get a hold of them right away because that same lead, weeks later, months later, the ability to contact them and the process by which you should be reaching out to them changes dramatically. And it starts to look more like an outbound cold lead that's never heard from you and less like an inbound warm lead that wants to hear from you.
At Kixie, we call this speed to lead. It's a very common use case. We came up with it because it was so common among the people who were reaching out to us for help. So the best way to handle a speed to lead use case is to build a system that prompts whoever is available right now to reach out and connect with this person.
So lead comes in, the second that lead comes in, before we assign it to a rep, because I'll tell you what typically happens, and as a sales leader, a lot of times what we do as sales leaders is we let our internal process dictate what the external experience is for the customer. I'll give you a great example. Lead comes in, and as a sales leader, we're like, okay, we want to round robin these leads to make sure every sales rep gets an equitable amount of leads coming in. But what does that result in? Well, the lead gets assigned to Kevin, and Kevin is busy on a demo call, after which he's got another discovery call, after which he's got to send out a document to try and get signature real quick before it's the end of the month. But you've got all this stuff in between, that lead coming in, and Kev being able to take advantage of it. But instead, we've got 2 or 3 other reps just sitting there waiting, you know what I mean? Just twiddling thumbs, unfortunately probably checking TikTok or Twitter or whatever like that. They're engaged, but not in a meaningful way that moves the company forward, right? So instead, let's go ahead and let's trigger an auto call, just like Aldo just mentioned, but let's go ahead and alert all the reps. And the first rep who's available and hits that buzzer, clicks accept to make that call, let's assign the lead to that rep, and let's make the experience one that's synchronous with the customer's experience and what the customer wants, rather than synchronous with what we want in terms of equality amongst our sales reps.
And I want to call out that not all hope is lost for these warm leads that become cold. Like I mentioned earlier, they're constantly fluctuating between those 2 states. I call that the carousel, and please do forgive the pun, we're working on it, but I like it. So
spoke was taken,
the spoke was taken, so this is what we went with.
Yeah.
But what I want to call out is that your warm leads, your inbound leads are entering this carousel in a warm state. Your outbound leads are entering in a cold state. But it's possible they go back and forth through re-engagement, and your mission as a sales team is to get them off the carousel and either convert them to the next stage of your deal pipeline or eject them from the CRM as unqualified, not interested. And so we need to develop a strategy, like I mentioned earlier, that recognizes when these shifts occur and the process that can handle them. So let's actually get into the brass tacks, which is what we're all here for, the workflow stuff, the automation, how we're going to build it inside of HubSpot.
Yeah.
So here's a great example of what not to do. This is where most of our customers start out at Kixie. A lead comes in, a form is submitted online, they round robin to a rep, then they assign a task for that rep to follow up, which is fine. But what if the rep is out to lunch when this happens, or they're on another call, they're on vacation? That's slow to lead.
Yeah, slow lead's bad.
Bad. We want to not arbitrarily assign our leads to reps based on some kind of rotation. We want to send out a signal to all of the reps at once saying, hey, they're here right now. Who is available to talk to them right away? Also, it's good to send an email and it's good to send a text message. 3 channels of communication right away when they express interest in your solution.
It's basically what we want them to have the ability to respond across whatever medium they prefer. Because some people, like me, I get a phone call and it's like, it's almost like someone just knocked on my door without being invited. I'm like, what the heck? Oh, a phone call, like, I'm not used to it. I'm used to text messages, I'm used to emails, at least some modus operandi of connection prior to that phone call coming in and me having to acquiesce to the time on the phone. So what we like to do is we like to use all the mediums at our disposal. So whether that's LinkedIn messaging, email, text message, and phone call. That way, look, whatever way that customer wants to respond to us, we're going to respond that way.
And I want to remind everyone that contact ownership has not yet been assigned. We don't need that yet. Assigning a contact owner happens once a meaningful conversation happens. They want to continue with that person in particular. Now they're a little more engaged and they want to build that rapport with the rep. But until that point, all 3 channels of communication that we mentioned should not lead back to one individual who could end up bottlenecking the whole process. They should all lead back to the entire team. So we're going to break down some tools that help accomplish this. A few of them are what we're talking about right now, our lead caller that can be sent to a contact owner, if that's how the process works, but I prefer sending it to the entire team. They would see on the Kixie Power Call Dialer a signal to accept, and we can even include a display name, some kind of a note about why they're being prompted to accept this call right now. So you should put something like new lead, hot lead in there. They're gonna be a little more incentivized to actually accept and call out.
So new lead comes in, every rep on the team gets an immediate notification, hey, new lead just came in, here's some details about them, click accept if you want to make a call to this person. And the first rep who hits accept is making that call. And only after that call is successful and they get in contact with that person, does that lead get assigned to them. So that way all the communication can start coming from that rep and not from a general email or phone number.
If they miss that call, when they call back, we can send it to that rep first who made the call. but we should at some point make sure that it's being forwarded to the entire sales team. That way, again, we're not slowing down this process. We're finding the, I'm gonna say this a lot, next available agent to take the call. Email can work the same way. Make sure that your emails at this stage of the journey come from a team. That way, if they respond, everyone can see it and jump on it right away. And SMS as well. So I actually want to quickly explain how Team SMS at Kixie works. We can send a shared text message across an entire sales team or any team that you have. All of the responses would go back to the whole team and it would be visible. If a person wants to claim the conversation, they can lock everyone out so they have some time to respond and your leads aren't being bombarded with the same response from 3 different hungry sales reps. They can even send internal notes, kind of like a chat or ticketing system, so that people can communicate in the thread while still being able to engage with that prospect.
Yeah, think about like a chat bot, but it's only taking place over text message. So all the people who are involved in that chat bot can reply over text, and the first one to reply, they lock in the conversation, it's their conversation. From that point on, we can assign the lead.
During this stage, the first phone call is the most important one. That's when they are the most engaged, they're actually looking right now. But if you don't reach them, you should continue to follow up in a high frequency cadence because they're still warm. Yeah. So we're still in the speed to lead use case. So I would recommend a high frequency of phone calls, text messages, and emails over the next 3 to 7 days. But now let's jump into what might actually happen if you don't connect with them during that time. They're cold now. Like I said earlier, don't give up on them just because they came cold. We have a process in place for that as well.
Yeah, I think too often as sales leaders, we neglect the lost deals. I know I've been guilty of that too. We have warm leads coming in. We have outbound leads or guys that have been working for a long time to prospect. Who wants to go back through the old lost deals and try and get those back? Even if they want to, the reps very rarely make the time to really do that. And so too often I think we fail to see all of our lost deals as an amazing source of potential revenue. I mean, just think about that. If you could recoup 20%, 15%, 25% of your lost deals as revenue, that would be incredible. And a lot of times that's actually the case. It's just that speed to lead didn't occur, slow to lead occurred, and we never got a hold of them initially. And then they found out maybe another solution or a competitor's product. They played around with it for a while. They didn't like it. Maybe they adopted it and then left. And in the meantime, they're just sitting in our CRM with all this data. So let's go ahead and let's engage with them just like we would a cold lead that was out in the wild, a lead that we're hunting that we've never spoken to before. At least this lead expressed interest in our product or service. The other leads are just super cold. So we want to make sure that we have a good way of recycling these leads.
So I mentioned earlier, it's important to be able to recognize when these shifts occur, warm to cold, cold to warm. And warm's pretty easy. HubSpot provides a bunch of great enrollment criteria that match warm leads, like emails open, page viewed on your website. All of these can be great ways of capturing those like re-engagements or initial engagements in the journey. When I mentioned that high frequency cadence from earlier, my last action step in that process, should they get to the end of the workflow without a conversion, would be to change the lead status or something, move the deal to a new stage, something to indicate in the CRM that the state of this lead has changed. We were not able to connect with them within the right amount of time at the first engagement.
And that's another thing. As a sales leader, oftentimes we let our sales reps accrue huge amounts of leads in their pipeline. And we look at it and we're like, dude, this guy's got like 80 deals, 100 deals in his pipeline. He's all set for next month, next quarter. But actually, 30% of them has had no contact for like a month or more. They're just sitting in a stage in that deal pipeline, inflating what we expect to come, disappointing us when it doesn't arrive, and making sure that lead is not availed of the cold lead outreach that Aldo's going to describe right now.
And so at this point, we call this process continuous follow-up. And this is also a great way to make sure that your sales reps are staying productive at all times. If there's no warm leads for them to engage with, they shouldn't be waiting for new ones to come through. They should be prospecting their lost deals or potentially reaching out to a cold list of outbound leads. So the trigger for this workflow would be what I mentioned in the last workflow. The lead status has changed. And now we're going to send them to Kixie's Power Dialer. Which can dial from 1 to 10 phone numbers at a time. You've probably heard of this type of technology before, but it's a fully integrated HubSpot power dialer that can allow you to reach out to lists of leads or your old leads. And when you're doing continuous follow-up, this is a secondary priority always. Warm leads, speed to lead, must always be prioritized and come first and disrupt these phone calls. And you're also going to be calling a much higher volume of leads at a lower frequency than what I mentioned before.
You hear that music bleeding through the wall, right? That is the excitement that this generates, right? That itself is
really
the momentum that we're going to pick up right here. Because when we think about it, when that warm lead comes in, we want much more specific outreach. We don't want that dial on Thursday at day 10, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. We don't want that. We want the call the second they open our email or engage with our gated content. Once they're cold, it's a different story because they're no longer engaging with us. We no longer have these events that would trigger the outreach that let us know it's a good time for them. Instead, what we should lean back on is the more prescriptive stuff that the other sales engagement platforms engage in all the time, right? We should be calling them multiple times a week, sending them text messages, sending them emails. And for me, I actually like to think of those emails and those text messages as bait. And what we do is we seed that bait out there. So we send out these text messages, we send out these emails, we embed a couple videos in the emails we send out, and then we wait. And we wait until there's a nibble. And all of a sudden, someone opens an email, or watches an embedded video, or responds to a text. And then the second they do that, they're no longer cold. Right? The second they do that, we want them back in the event-driven automation. We want to be able to call them that second that they open the email, or text them and say, hey, what do you think about that video you just watched? I know that it had some great content. I also know that it was kind of hard to hear me because there was a bunch of music, right? I want to be able to do that right away when the event happens.
Yep, that's exactly right. Prescriptive dialing is perfectly acceptable, like David mentioned, if there's no event that's relative to your outreach efforts. But you need to be prepared and brave enough to break that cycle when a new event occurs. And so you're going to notice that the way that we re-engage a cold lead who has interacted with some of your new efforts is very similar to the initial speed to lead workflow that I showed you earlier. The only thing that might have changed is the trigger. So I think in that first one, it was a new form submission, and now it's a page viewed or an email link clicked. They responded to your text message. But notice that we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to trigger another speed to lead call to your entire sales team.
So what's cool is you don't have to have myriad workflows where you've got a workflow for outbound leads, workflow for inbound leads that are warm, workflow for inbound leads that are cold and lost, workflow for leads that are like middling in the qualified stage of your pipeline but haven't yet converted. You don't need that. We really just need a bifurcated system where if it's warm, then we're hitting them up with event-driven stuff. We're calling, we're texting, we're emailing based on their engagement with us or our messaging or whatever. And if they're cold, we want to switch it up and we want to dial them with 10 lines at a time and connect only when they answer the phone, or send them emails and text messages that act as bait and try and get them back into the warm lead modality that we were using before.
All right. Congratulations, you've re-engaged the cold lead, you connected with your warm lead, you qualified them, and they are interested in moving forward, and now we are talking about perhaps the most important phase of the whole sales process, the handoff. The
handoff's really tricky. For those of you who have dealt with BDR teams and inbound AE teams and the transition between them, this is where a lot of times that baton we picture up there, that thing gets dropped. Because you have an outbound lead that someone is really excited about. Your BDR just brought him in, your SDR just brought him in, and they're super excited. And then you've got an AE who's got 60 of these things. And it's like, okay, another one, you know what I mean? And this one looks less qualified than the one I talked to before. And they're like, I'll fit it into my schedule. And now what you have is you have a super engaged lead talking with a super warm, excited SDR or BDR, and they're encountering this kind of cold area of water that is the AE, right? And what we want to do is we want to make sure they pick it up right away. They are able to act on that lead coming in and treat them as if they were hot and warm, rather than put them in their stack of existing leads and get to them when they get to them.
Exactly. So there's two main ways that we see this handoff being facilitated. And we're going to talk about both because sometimes they're both necessary depending on the process. And so scheduling the demo. A rep is not available to speak right now, so we're going to use a team calendar to find the next available appointment that works for the lead, and we're going to book that time. And there's actually some pros and some cons to doing this. And so the pros are that now the closer, usually AE, has some time to prepare and really tailor their message to the prospect based on what we've learned about them so far. The fear here, though, is the coveted no-show. You really don't want to have that happen. And we actually mitigate that with team or SMS. So we can do a scheduled Kixie SMS reminder. before the meeting happens.
Scheduling a demo is so scary because, again, you've got this warm lead. They're on the phone with the BDR or SDR. They're super excited. They want to learn more. And they haven't yet visited your competitor's website yet. And what you're doing is you're taking that lead, it's super warm, it hasn't looked at alternatives, and you're like, let's schedule a time. Oh, next Thursday at 10 a.m. in the morning. And now you've got this gap of time for them to look for alternatives, for them to find the one or two angry customers that are really vociferous on that G2 review site, to suddenly decide that, hey, there's another competitor that looks, I've never heard of before, it's based in some country with poor support, and it doesn't look like they have many customers, but they're so cheap. They're so cheap. They're like half of the cost of this other service I'm looking at, right? So we don't want that. What we would love to have is a warm handoff, but if this has to happen, and sometimes it does, I mean, look, right now this has been the year of efficiency for most of you guys, right, for us as well. And so it hasn't meant hiring an overabundance and over-indexing on sales reps to deals to make sure there's always one available right away. What it's meant is trying to really maximize the ratio of rep to deal and trying to make sure that our knees aren't over our skis, to speak. So instead, what we want to do is we'd love to do some automation to keep that lead warm. If it is going to be a couple days, 2 days, even 24 hours before a rep gets on the phone with that lead, we want text messages, we want content being dripped out to that lead so they stay focused and engaged on us and our service.
And at this point, it is okay for that text message to come from a direct rep. I find that it's most helpful when that text message comes from the direct phone number of the actual AE themselves. That way, if the lead does need to reschedule for whatever reason, they can reply back, it goes right to the right person, and they can sort of work out a better time from there.
Yeah, at this point, we don't want these text messages and emails coming from info@Kixie.com. We want them coming from Aldo@Kixie.com, right? Because people want to talk to people. I experience this anytime I call in to try and get support from something, and I'm forced to talk to like a bot or a giant IVR with press button options. Like, I hate it. Everyone just whacks 0 on their phone as much as possible to try and get to a live person, because that's who we want to talk to. And you want to be able to have a cohesive conversation so that if I come back into conversation, I don't have to restate all of the information I gave the last time I was talking to somebody. So we want to assign that lead, and we want to make sure all the communication, calls, texts, emails, are all coming from that individual rep at this point and not from a generalized inbox.
That's exactly right. And now the second method of transferring is at the live transfer. So again, speed to lead, next available agent. Rather than clicking through the entire Kixie directory to find someone who's available right now, let's just send it to the entire closing sales team, which we can do right here through the directory. And that way, once again, just like the speed to lead use case from earlier, whoever's available can answer right now and make that warm handoff while they're most engaged.
This is great. This is like the best case scenario. So you've got that excited BDR or SDR, they've got the deal on the line, they're ready to go, and they can transfer it right over to a live AE. And then what we want to make sure happens is that lead gets assigned not to the SDR or BDR, they can get tagged on it as the SDR or BDR so they can get their meeting for the month, but instead we want to make sure it's assigned to the AE, right? Because that's going to be the person handling it right now from here on out.
And finally, we get to attribution. So we want to make sure that everyone's getting credit for their efforts. And we also want to make sure that the CRM is getting updated based on what's going on. So go ahead and log a HubSpot call outcome from Kixie Power Call. And both reps should be doing this if a transfer happened. If it's all combined into one role, then that person just needs to log an outcome to indicate what happened on their call. And that way you can assign your prospector to some kind of custom ownership field like SDR or qualifying rep. And then the respective closer can also log a separate outcome that can indicate to the CRM how the conversation went and then become the assigned AE from there.
My CEO actually taught me something really important. Actually, I think he's here. Jeff, you here? I think he's right over there. So anyway, Jeff taught me something really important when I first started in a leadership role. And that was that if you've got somebody who's great at one thing and they are not so good at other things, let's get them a role that focuses on the thing they're good at as opposed to spending a ton of time and energy trying to level up what they're a D at into a B+. Instead, let's focus on what they can go from an A- to an A+ in, right? And sales reps, let me tell you, they suck at inputting data into the CRM. They just do. For those of you sales reps from Kixie team who are listening to this live, I apologize. I'll put myself in this category too. I was terrible at it. We're too focused on closing deals. There's no incentive for us to put that data into the CRM. It's all for the manager. It's not going to affect my commissions at all. It's just extra work that takes me away from closing deals. So rather than continually crack whip on sales reps and be like, hey, make sure you enter data in the CRM. Everybody enter data in the CRM. We're going to have a PIP. You're going to put you on a PIP if you don't enter data in the CRM. Let's just automate that. Let's take it out of their hands, man. Let's focus on what they're good at. They're really good at bringing deals in and closing them. And they're really bad at entering data into the CRM. But the great news is that HubSpot workflows let us automate a lot of this deal assignment, a lot of this deal qualification data right away based off of an outcome of the call. So after they get in talking to the person, they can just log a quick outcome in Kixie, and all of a sudden it's going to fill in all the stuff that they need that we would normally have to qualify that lead for, which is great. That way they comply, we don't have to bug them. Us as sales leaders who are concerned with metrics, we get the metrics we want, and they get the extra time they want to close the deal.
So knowing when to call is important. Knowing when to reach out is vital. It's also good, though, to know when to stop calling. When you've actually connected with them, they're vetted, they're a newly paid customer, and the last thing they want is to get another call from your team trying to set up a demo for the thing they just bought. So now let's just talk about some guardrails to ensure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, this is like, once you've got them and they're excited, I see this happen a lot. I've been subject to this too, where like, all right, you've got me, I'm already in the sales process, I'm talking to somebody, maybe I've even bought, and I continue to get this email drip or this text message drip about, hey, sign up for Kixie right now. Hey, if you go to Kixie.com, there's a new offer. And I'm like, dude, I'm already engaged with you. Could you just stop with this stuff? How do you not have the ability to just end this on your own without me having to contact you and me getting upset? So let's make sure we do that.
So
take care of that.
Your call, SMS, and email drip campaigns, they have workflow goals. Status has changed, they became a customer, or they're not interested, or they're not qualified. All of those should be goals, and that can be represented by a deal stage, by a lead status, whatever makes sense for you. But we also want to talk about that power dialer use case for when those leads become cold, and they might be in more than one power list at a time. So let's take all of those workflow goals that we set up and create a separate workflow, where those workflow goals now become a workflow trigger. And then the action step will be very simple. Just remove from all power lists. That way we'll ensure that we're not trying to call you through any channel. And make sure that that bad experience doesn't happen for your customers.
Cool. The great thing about HubSpot, you got goals right in the workflow. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to stop those texts, stop those emails, stop those automated calls after a lead gets to a certain stage in the process. That could be a stage where they're like, hey, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Great, okay, lost, like real lost deal, the last deal that we don't want to talk to for a bit. Or it could be someone who closed and they're excited already about Kixie, they're coming on board. We don't want to keep barraging them with outreach. We really don't.
To recap, our leads are always fluctuating, warm and cold. The most important thing that we can do is recognize those shifts and have a process in place to handle both. Do not forget that your warm leads are constantly cooling. And if too much time goes on, they become cold. And make sure that you have a process in place to identify that and an outreach process to recover them and bring them back into the fold.
Cool. Before we do Q&A, I got an interesting story. It's going to seem like it's totally out of left field, but stick with me here for a minute. If I were, I sometimes think about this, if I were like an alien and I came to Earth and you asked me to guess which technology presaged, meaning which came before which technology, text messaging or calling, well, I think I'd get it wrong every time. I would guess that text messaging came first and calling came second. And the reason I'd say that is because text messaging, well, it's unidirectional. It's from one person to one person. It contains a small amount of data across a set number of characters. And there's no tonality, there's no voice modulation, there's no inflection. It's one direction and not unidirectional, bidirectional, right? So I would always guess that came first. And that calling, where there is tonality, there is inflection, people can even talk over each other, that came later. But I'd be wrong, right? I'd be 100% wrong. These days, I mean, me specifically, and many of you, I'm sure, have migrated more to text than phone calls. And why is that? I would argue that the main reason is because of synchronicity to our schedule. When I text you, I get to text you at a time that's convenient for me, and you get to reply at a time that's convenient for you. And that one piece of data, that one singular feature of text messaging outdoes everything else. It's why we're okay. Sometimes you have a text messaging exchange and people get upset, you get into an argument you didn't mean to because there's no inflection, because there's no tonality. But we're willing to accept all that, all the drawbacks of that, just because it synchronizes with our schedule. So when we think about our sales engagement stack, we want that sales engagement stack to synchronize with our customer's schedule, not be our schedule. We want it to be synchronized with their schedule because we know that's more important than almost anything else. So when we think about when we want to call or text or email somebody, just remember, it should not be an arbitrary time. It should not be an arbitrary day. It should be based off of their engagement with our material. And if there's one thing to take away, I think, from this presentation, it's that. It's that when you guys create your outreach campaign, you should base it off all the data coming into HubSpot, all the information you have about your customers, potential customers' schedule, and not based off of your schedule as a business. Awesome, guys. It's been great talking to you. I know there's a lot of questions typically around workflows. We're going to be right out there. If you have specific questions, you want to learn about how we do this, feel free to ask.
Thanks, everybody.